Hello everyone, Douglas Macbeth again with my review of week 2 this time. Before I start on that, I perhaps should follow up on my promise last week to review the webinar in week 1 on performance-based contracting. It was a very good presentation, lots of material in it, lots of nice diagrams, and perhaps best suited to the more experienced members of our group. But remember, in all of these courses, all of these materials, if there are things that aren't quite relevant to you now, don't forget about them. You can always come back and look at them later. And there's some real gems in there. Even if you're not at that level of experience to make these things possible in your own organisation, you can still look at these as learning opportunities, and the way that the presentation forces you to think about the ways in which existing practice and thinking is being challenged. And that kind of open mindset is something that you'll find very useful indeed. This week, again, lots of good discussion. Clearly there are some experienced people in the group this time round, and we're getting a chance to learn from each other really well. So lots of good discussion, so please keep it going. We will of course be feeding back some results of your poll this week, and hopefully you also enjoyed the peer review exercise. Even although we had to choose a subject which was the best we could think of in terms of something that most of you would have some exposure to one way or another. So anyway, thanks for taking part in that one. This week, the webinar was on contract and commercial stars. And again, different kind of presentation, but nevertheless very valuable. A couple of key messages that I took out of it was how you still need the core capabilities to do the job properly, but increasingly the subjective or more subjective activities are becoming important, so that in terms of developing skill sets to become a star, the agenda is growing rather than diminishing. But that means the career prospects for those of you who actually take this seriously and go on to develop further, I think the career prospects are really interesting and quite challenging, but could be very rewarding, because increasingly organisations of all kinds need people with much wider vision than was traditionally the case. So if this course is helping you to develop that further, then that's all to the good. There was certainly a good list of attributes to develop and reinforce, and we'll come back to this from a slightly different setting in week 3 when we look at developing the skills that are needed, particularly from a civil service point of view. Anyway, one of the messages that stuck really well with me from this week's webinar was that the comment that after a catastrophe, can hardly say it, after a catastrophe, is the only time that you can sell upper management on making an investment in risk management. So we've talked about risk already. We've talked about the difficulties of how do you actually account for the costs of mitigation when the probability of the event is very low, and yet we're all living through a very low probability event with high, very serious impact. But we've already made the point, particularly in some comments, that this was not, the possibility of COVID-19 was not unknown, maybe not exactly the same way, but that kind of a problem was certainly anticipated if the details couldn't been forecast. However, the reality is that not enough people took the risk seriously enough to be properly prepared. So let's hope after this catastrophe is further mitigated, it's not yet over, of course. Once it's further mitigated, organisations of all kinds will take these aspects of risk preparedness. Maybe you can't manage all of the mitigations, but you can at least think of what you need to do when the time comes. And certainly in our country that doesn't seem to have been very well thought through. Although the exercises were done, the lessons were there to be learned. Anyway, next week we're going on to innovation and change. So knowing all of these good new things, the challenge is how do we make it happen? And how do we encourage ourselves and our organisations to think more creatively and to see the opportunities that might be opening up to us all after this catastrophe is under better control. Anyway, stick with it. Thanks very much for your efforts so far. I'm enjoying reading all of the comments, and there's a lot of them. You're doing well. So hopefully you're ready to enjoy week 3. And the sense of accomplishment at the end will be quite something, I hope. Anyway, bye for now. Talk next week.